Hello and welcome to Everything Bass. We're continuing on with the Unlimited Musician series. Today we're talking about a concept that I found has unbelievable benefit to musicians. I found this to help choreographer I was working with. So many different patrons of the arts that I've been able to help get past writer's block, creativity block. And it's a concept that I came up with years and years and years ago that has always worked for me and seemingly works for others. And it's called limitation studies. So there's a lot of traps creative people fall into. One is we get something and we have a great result, and that's wonderful. But that becomes almost like a rut in a road, where every time we drive on that road trying to create, we go to that because that's safe. And so the tire goes into the rut and we find ourselves regurgitating the same thing. So that's one problem, where we plagiarize ourselves. It's hard to get out of our own way, get out of our own head. And there's wonderful musicians that redefine themselves millions of times, actors who completely change their character each time, and we can take inspiration from that. So I'm going to show you through limitation studies how you can do that. Now, the other option is analysis paralysis. I've talked about this in previous editions of this series, where there's so many options ahead of you. You can sit down to be creative, or even live in front of the band. You can, they throw a solo to you and say, take it. And you're thinking, what should I do? This, that, this, that, this. I could do this, or I could quote this guy, or maybe I'll start with this thing. And all of a sudden, the moment's passed, and then you get self-conscious, and the train is well off the tracks. So, how does limitation studies work? Well, it works this way. You remove a lot of options. You narrow things down to one thing. And I want to be very clear here. When you want to effectively do limitation studies, you don't start with the limitation. And if that domino falls and ideas start coming to you, but they're outside of your limitation, suspend the limitation. And this will make sense as I go through an example. But if you start with a certain limitation, I'm only going to do this. Everything I create is going to be this. And some new concepts come and you're like, wow, that's fresh. But it takes you outside of that, abandon it, because that's what you did. That was the fire starter. That was like someone starting a fire by striking a stone onto flint or whatever. And I'm not great at survival, but imagine that when you get that spark and you start to see it smoking, you don't keep hitting this and trying to warm everyone around with just this. You abandon that, and then you address this, and you start adding more stuff, and you blowing on it until you have a fire. That's how you should look at limitation studies. It's the spark. And if it takes you somewhere, abandon that. Abandon the flint and go and try to actually, follow that wave to creating something new. So let me give you an example. And my example is from bass, because that's, my whole career. But you can look at a physical limitation. You might say, okay, on this bass line, I'm only going to use my B and my E string. So I'm not going to use anything else. That's called a physical limitation. You're taking part of your instrument away. I've seen amazing drummers do this, where they get frustrated because they realize they start all their phrases with the same tom on their drums. They just take it off. And now it's gone. So they limited their physical instrument so that it can't. I had an instructor at MI, because he saw that I was playing the same thing over and over again in this one class. He just put tape over one of my strings. So, okay, that string's no longer valid. And that kind of was where I got the idea behind limitation studies, because it did force me into new territories. Likewise, you can do things like, if you find yourself playing on one area or instrument, and let's say you're improvising, and here comes the C dominant 7th chord, and you jump here because that's your most familiar. Well, where you're most familiar are the ruts in the road. Maybe jump up here, play up here, maybe play here. Try to break it into two strings. Again, a physical limitation of the instrument limitation. There's also theoretical music and harmony limitations, where you could say, I'm going to do an improvised solo, but because I want to break out of my ruts, I'm not going to use any tonics. So as an A minor chord comes up, I'm not going to play A at all. I'm going to just do this. I've seen a lot of people talk about I've done that where I'll just make sure I improvise on one string. I know piano players have said, I'm not going to venture any outside of this range of the instrument because this is the range I rarely play. Or I did another great limitation study pianist was talking about is taking away the middle part, the ultimate low octave and the ultimate high octave. And she tried to improvise a solo just with the farthest apart on her instrument. She had none of the interior middle notes, just playing that. And that was the catalyst for a really cool solo. As soon as she got a new idea, she abandoned it and used the entire instrument, and that's what we need to do. So very common in jazz studies, one of the most common limitation studies they give you is chord tone soloing. They won't let you play scales or chromatic notes, just the chord tones. I love this. I do this all the time, especially with a new chart. If I'm doing a study on a new jazz chart, I'll just start walking a bass line using just chord tones, take my first solo using just chord tones. That's accomplishing a couple things. One, it's mapping out my fingerboard. It's getting me familiar with all the harmony and how notes lead into, oh, look, the third here is really a half step to the octave there and all this stuff. And you kind of get this better appreciation of the actual chord harmony of it. Then as you get these ideas, you flow out. But also we can get on stringed instruments, we can get very addictive to consecutive note runs where you play very close phrases. With arpeggio, we're jumping larger intervals, and so that can maybe break us out of that. So that's another example, is just chord tones. Improvise a solo or bass line using just chord tones. I've seen guitar players, I haven't done this myself, but I've seen guitar players who are frustrated with their chord voicings do everything in first inversion, where the tonic is on the top of the stacked notes and your lowest note is your third. And just because they're tired of writing the same song over and over again. So limitation studies can be really wonderful. Now, sometimes you have limitation studies forced upon you, and for stringed instruments, this is very common with breaking a string. So you break a string, but you're live, you can't take a pause and do it, change it, so you just sit there and have to adapt. And you listen back and go, wow, that was new, that was something new. So that's where limitation studies help you explore new areas. Now, it sounds like a paradox, and some of you might resist this because I'm saying to get to new unexplored territories, limit where you're at. It's just a great pure way to get the first thing going. I remember reading about a painter who, if he's like staring at the blank page and couldn't come up with like a concept for painting, he would just close his eyes and make one stroke, and then look back, and that one stroke was the inspiration for his painting. And it would be random. He wouldn't like try to, I'm doing an S. No, he said he would just kind of like start moving his hand and then kind of go at the paper and then look back at what was on the paper. And then he had that first spark that allowed him to go on. And that's what we want out of this. A limitation, working in a very small area of music, and then as soon as that inspiration comes, open the doors and take it somewhere. Now, if you find yourself with this new idea, let's say you're a drummer and you find this new rhythm because you took some of your kit away, or you said, okay, I'm not going to play eighth notes at all. The whole groove is going to be either 16th notes or quarter notes. And you get this new idea for a drum beat. So then you take off the reins and you say, okay, now I can freely explore with this, and you drum back into a rut where it's the same thing. Then you might want to look at what are the elements of that rut. Is that because of a trick you learned between the floor tom and the kick drum that you're just addicted to doing? Well, get rid of the floor tom. Start again. Go to the limitation study, build up that groove, and now when you freely improvise, that's missing, which is a good thing. So you can have degrees of limitation, so you can stay there. Now, I will say, and this is so easy now with the technology available to us, record, record, record. If you're doing a limitation study, the worst part is to go, oh, this is awesome, and then not know how to recreate it. So with your phones, just do a memo recording, or do a video can be better, because just in case you can't hear what you're doing, you might be able to see it. And if you're doing this with a band, these can be group exercises, which is really great. Take and say to the band, hey, let's improvise just these chords. And you can even pick random chords, which is a lot of fun to do, by the way. Just say, give me a root. The guy says a root. Give me a root. Give me a root. And then have another person give me a chord quality. And you write a progression that's probably going to sound rough. but you improvise anyway. It's a limitation study. We're only going to play with those chords because you might break you guys into new things. I love doing limitation studies with other artists because it really, the inspiration comes quicker because they'll do something, you're like, that was cool, and you might try to add it, and now it's a new element to your playing. Man, I'm sorry, this is turned out to be a long video, but I really believe in limitation studies. So try them out yourself. As soon as this video is over, grab whatever instrument you do, or if you're painter, sculptor, or anything, a limitation. Figure out what would be a limitation. With sculptors, I've talked to some of them and had them work with just one hand. Because we can get into this, again, mechanic rut where we do something with both hands, and we do something, maybe on a potter's wheel, we're used to doing something with two hands. Now, what happens when we only have one hand? Work that limitation, something new might come out. There's a ton of examples, and I want to hear yours. Try this, please try this. And then share in the comments section below with the entire group what you did. What was your limitation? First of all, what's your medium? Is it music? If so, what's your instrument? What was the limitation? If you're a choreographer or a dancer, what was the limitation you put? Did you do everything as floor work? Did you do everything but your arms were behind your back the entire time? Believe it or not, it cross-pollinates. Hearing the success a sculptor, a painter, a dancer has can help a musician find new ways to play, and that's what we're all about. I'm so excited about this series. As you can tell, it's something I'm passionate about, and it's something that I actually was hired to teach and to consult. I've actually consulted an actor back, this is in the 90s, but who was having problems with creativity and expression. And so these all transfer. I want to know what you think. Please also, this is a bold new video series for this channel because we're talking beyond bass. So please share it with everyone in your band, share it with other musicians you know. Get their input. I just really am excited to hear. I would love people from other countries who play instruments that I'm not even familiar with, chime in and tell us, describe what they're doing. And this is only make us all stronger, make us all more creative, and make us better expressive musicians. And that's exciting. Hey, thank you so much. I'll see you at the next video.